Welcome back everybody. Today we have kind of a different video. Today I'm gonna rank every agent on the new map Corrode. This is gonna be based off of my thinking of the map, my understanding of the map, how I feel like it is in-game, and then over the 4 different leagues that we have and the stats we have from them. Starting off, I want to say we have a lot of different picks on this map. It isn't quite as diverse as on some other maps, especially because it is kind of a map that is pretty similar to different maps with different parts they have. For example, it has a pretty big map mid, like for example Ascent has. It also has a lot of narrow angles, which is pretty good for a lot of smokes and also for duelists. And also it is a pretty big map, so a Cipher or just somebody that can hold map control is going to be a agent that is going to be played pretty often. Other than that, we also see a lot of agents that are mainly meant to stop a push, and we have a lot of agents that are meant to go for a fight with. Starting off with Astra. In my opinion, Astra is an S tier agent. We can't really see that in the VCT. There's going to be mainly picked an Omen. You can see on most maps you have Omen almost everywhere. Most of the teams are picking an Omen. Omen is a pretty versatile agent. He's also pretty good with his TPs. He's not, in my opinion, that much better than an Astra. He is around the same level as an Astra, but I just think in your ranked games you're going to have more use out of an Astra because you can have more global smoke, so you can play on one side and then even smoke the other side pretty quickly. Switching over towards Breach. Breach is, in my opinion, an A tier agent. He can be used pretty well. In VCT, we had a lot of duelist plays, especially Neon and Yuru, and I think you can set up your team with a Breach pretty well. You barely had any Breach. I don't think there was a single match with a Breach on this new map, but in my opinion, I think Breach can still be used pretty well, and if you play him right, and if you play him especially with your duelist, he can be pretty good in your ranked games. Brimstone, in my opinion, a B tier agent. He's not really that great. He has only 3 smokes. The map is pretty big, so he doesn't have the range to smoke all of the options off, and he also isn't quite as good with his other util. His mollies are okay. His ult is pretty good. That's the only thing about the Brim I really like on this map. That's the thing I don't really like about the Astra. The Astra ult is not that great, but the Brim ult is pretty great, but I still think in general you get more value out of any other smokes agent, or out of most smokes agent other than, for example, a Brim. Now switching over towards the Chamber. Chamber has been played kind of commonly, and I don't really see why. I know his TP is pretty good. I know he's a pretty good op agent, which is also pretty good if you are playing him, for example, on mid. Or you can use his trap for passive map information, which is pretty good on a big map like Corrode is. But I don't really see the value out of the A chamber. In your ranked games, he can work, but I would just give him the B tier. Switching over towards Clove, and Clove I'm also going to put in the B tier. I know a lot of people really like the Clove. She has not been played in any of the VCT matches, by the way, and I also don't think Clove is that good of an agent. I know she has the ability to smoke after her death, and the rest of her abilities are pretty self-centered, so pretty easy to use, but I personally don't think a Clove is that good on the new map, and also her smokes are not that big and they don't last for that long, which makes her not that good of an agent. Also, she doesn't really have that many one-ways, as for example on a map like Sunset, where we have way more one-ways, where a Clove can be really annoying to play against. You don't really have that thing on Corrode. Switching over towards the Cipher, and I was debating on putting Cipher in the S tier, but I'm gonna put him at the top of the A tier. He is, in my opinion, the best A tier agent. His traps can be used really well for passive map information. He can also have a lot of trips that can be played on site, but not really the really creative trips, as for example on a map like Ascent. So he's mainly for map control and also for like map information, especially as a flank watch. He is a pretty good. Also, he is a pretty good lurk agent, and you can use his cages pretty well. There's also some one ways which you can have lineups for, so I think using a Cipher can be pretty good, but he is not an S tier agent. Coming over towards Deadlock though, in my opinion, Deadlock is an S tier agent on the new map. There's a lot of corners where you can place the traps. Also, it is really hard to entry with the Deadlock traps, especially on the B side. And in my opinion, Deadlock is just the best sentinel on this map. You don't have the passive map information that you have, for example, on the Cipher, but Deadlock is just insanely good at locking down a site, especially with her wall. Also, her Grafnet being on a cooldown of 40 seconds can be really useful, and I think Deadlock has to be a meta pick on the new map. Now going over towards Fade, and Fade I would also put in the S tier. From my experience, I think Fade and Sova, the same group of initiator, they are info initiators, and I just think Fade has a little bit more information, and also the map is pretty much made for a Fade. I know the map is pretty big, but it also has a lot of corners which you can easily clear out with the Fade Fade dogs, and a Fade reveal can be thrown at a lot of really high spots, making a Fade in general a better pick. She is also in pro play almost double the amount of times picked over a Sova, and I see why, because Sova is still a pretty good agent. You can use them on almost any map, but Fade is just a better agent with all of the heights where you can put the reveals on. Also, the dogs and the seas can be used pretty well to stop enemy aggression. Now switching over to another sleeper pick. In my opinion, Gecko is an A-tier agent, especially on this map, because you have a lot of options to kind of reclaim the Dizzy, reclaim the Wingman to kind of take a lot of the map control, and I think he can be used pretty well. Switching over towards Harbor. Harbor is another sleeper pick. I would put him in the A tier. He is, that is though one of my personal opinions. I think Harbor is really underrated. Most people don't really know how to play him, but in general, I think Harbor can be used pretty well on the new map. You can cut off a lot of the angles. He is pretty good for retakes. He's also pretty good to go for a plant or a diffuse, and in general, I think Harbor is just a pretty good agent to use on this map. He's not the best agent. I would still pick an Astra over him, but if you have a Clove and a Harbor on your team, you can use him pretty well. Or if you have a Harbor on one side, locking him down on defense, and then the Sentinel, like a Deadlock or a Vice on the other side to lock down the other side, it can be a pretty good pick, and then you have the rest of the team just supporting you wherever you need them. ISO is, in my opinion, a C-tier agent. He has had a buff, which made him pretty strong, the vulnerable also detaining people, but I still don't think ISO is that great of an agent. He has the best ability in the game, but yeah, you can play him on any map. It doesn't make anything special about him on this map to make him worth playing over most of the other duelists, so I think ISO is just a C-tier agent. He is pretty good. You can obviously play him, but he's not really especially good on this map. Switching over towards the Chet. Chet can be good. Chet is just a default duelist pick. I will put her a little above the Breach. I think Chet can be used pretty well. That is the case on most maps. Like I think there's no map where you can not play a Chet on. And yeah, she is not like insanely strong, but she's also not weak on this map. KO has had some pro games, and I am not quite sure where to put him. In my opinion, he is similar to a Breach. He doesn't have the stuns, but he has the reveal. So he has some information tools that can get him information and makes him pretty good. But also he is, with his flashes, you kind of need the lineups and you need to have a lot of prep for him, which with a Breach you have it way easier. You could just flash through walls. And if you put in the time, a KO can be better than a Breach, but in general I would say a KO is just an A-tier agent. Killjoy is also a pretty interesting pick. I'm also not really sure where to put her. I would put her above the Chet, because she has a lot of passive map control, but also her util is limited by range, so you can't really move around as freely as, for example, on a Cipher. But a Killjoy ult can be insanely good in a lot of different spots. If you take a little bit of map control, you can get a lot of space with a Killjoy ult, and in general, Killjoy's util can be pretty good to hold, especially the mid space and the B side. Also can be used pretty well on the A side, just for information. Neon is, in my opinion, an S-tier agent. We also see that especially in Pacific, not really that much in VCT EMEA. We still have 2 Neons, but still in Pacific she has one of the highest pick rates of any duelist, as you can see here, picked by most of the teams, and I can see why. As long as you don't have a Cipher on the enemy team and if you have some way to set the Neon up, Neon can be a pretty strong agent, and I think putting her in the S tier is a pretty valuable pick. Also, as you can see in China, she is one of the more picked duelists as well, and also a little bit in the NA region. So S tier agent for sure. Now putting the Omen somewhere, it is pretty hard. I'm not sure if I should put him above Astra or below Astra, so I'm gonna put them at the same spot. Astra, Omen, they are just a little bit different. You can play more aggressive on an Omen, you can play more passive on an Astra. Astra can also be used to lurk. Omen is more of an active player. You can play with your team, especially with your duelists. So I will put them like at the same level, depending on your playstyle. Phoenix is an interesting pick. I personally don't really like a Phoenix. He can be decent on this map. I'm gonna put him at the top of the B tier. His flashes are really strong. He has been played in a pro play game. I think it was in EMEA, if I remember right. And yeah, he was played by BBL, and he is an interesting pick. He is definitely one you're not gonna see every time, and he can be used pretty well. Also, the farming the ult orbs can be pretty strong on the Phoenix, and the ult orbs being pretty attacker side makes him a pretty good pick on this map as well. But personally, I just don't see the value over picking, for example, a KO or a Breach over a Phoenix. Raze is sadly not that good of an agent. I'm gonna put her actually below the Phoenix, because even though the map has a lot of corners and you can use Raze's kit pretty well on this map, she's still kind of weird to use. You don't really have the open spaces. You can use shotguns pretty well on this map, but just from playing her myself, I don't really think she is that good. It could also be that I'm just washed, but I used to play a lot of Raze. I think Raze is my second most played agent in the game, and I personally wouldn't really use her on this map. Raina, F tier. I'm sorry. Anyone that likes Raina, Raina is just, yeah, she doesn't really have any util for your team. You can play Raina on any map. It isn't a specific map where you can use a Raina better or worse. So Raina is just an F tier agent. Sage is actually an interesting pick. I was debating on putting her either in the A tier or even down to the C tier. So I'm gonna put her in the B tier, but at the end of the B tier, because with her walls, you can kind of use her like a duelist, making her a pretty good pick, but you can't really use her as a sentinel. I mean, you can still use slows on the entrance and heal your teammates, but in my opinion, she's not really that great of a sentinel, and you're better off picking, for example, a Deadlock, a Vice, or just even any other sentinel other than a Sage. Skye has had some picks. I would put Skye above the Phoenix on the B tier. Her flashes give you information. In my opinion, also you can get more value out of a Skye. I was debating on putting her also in the A tier with the other two initiators with flashes, KO and Breach, but she doesn't have recharging util, so she is not quite as good as, for example, a KO with his recharging 0 point and a Breach with his recharging stun. Sova, decent pick. I'm gonna put him at the middle of the A tier, just above the Killjoy. He can be used. I personally would prefer a Fade, but still, using a Sova, you're not doing anything wrong. He is pretty easy to play, and you can also use him pretty well, especially to stall out the plan and kind of do early damage on the enemies when they are coming in. In my opinion, Taekyo, underrated pick, so I'm gonna put him right next to Harbor, which I personally also think is an underrated pick. In my opinion, Gecko, Harbor, and Taekyo are like agents a lot of people don't really think about anymore, so putting Taekyo in the A tier is pretty high. I know that is my personal opinion. That is not based off of any pro plays, but I still think you can use a Taekyo pretty well, especially his ult. And if you use him right, you can get a lot of value out of him and make it really hard for the enemies to play against. Viper is a pretty hard agent to put. You can see she has been played in pro play, but always with another smokes agent. In your ranked games, especially like here on the Pacific regions, you see a lot of the Viper also has an Omen with her, and they are using her as a second smokes. In your rank games, you're not really gonna get that. In your rank games, I had that happen, that I had two Vipers on my team, on the enemy team, and we both had like double smokes on both teams, but she is not quite as good in ranked as she is in pro play, so I'm gonna put her on the C tier, a little bit above the ISO. I would debate if you have another smokes agent or if you have another duelist, you can play both of these agents, but in general, they are not that good played alone. Now switching over to the Vice, and Vice is difficult to place. She's either an S tier agent or an A tier agent. I'm gonna put her in the S tier because I think she is similar to a Deadlock, and I think she can be used pretty well, especially to stall out an enemy's push. So using a Deadlock is not a bad idea. Also using a Vice is not a bad idea. You get a little bit more information over a Deadlock with a Vice, and you can also stall out the enemies a little bit better with a Vice. But the Deadlock Grafnet is just such a insanely strong pick, so I'm just gonna say she is a little bit worse than a Deadlock, and you can use her ult pretty well. She's similar to a Killjoy ult, so Vice is a pretty good pick. Deadlock is a little bit better, but pick either one of those and you will most likely have a good time playing them. Wayle is interesting. I personally am not a fan of Wayle. I'm gonna put Wayle in the middle of the A tier with my questionable picks. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but the game where they played, where Team Heretics played Wayle against, I think it was Gentlemates, where they were down really far on attack, and then on defense they came all the way back and even won the map.
Nice slow down.
Move over the top, nice set piece, brilliant in fact. Even aware of the third player, which he will...
It was a pretty good Wayle on defense. On attack, I wasn't really a fan of the Wayle that much, so I'm gonna put her in the A tier. I don't really know where to put her else. Her TP can be pretty good. You can take a lot of space on defense, also on attack. And if you play it right, Wayle can be a good pick, but you need to have a lot of prep for her. And Yuru, still a pretty decent agent. I'm gonna put him just under the Cipher in the A tier. His ability to TP all over the map is a pretty strong one, and he can be used pretty well on this map. And the last change I'm gonna make In my opinion, the best agent on the map, Corrode, is Deadlock. Her traps are just so insanely strong. Her Graphnet is also pretty good. So in my opinion, Deadlock is the best agent. After that, you have Astra, Omen, same spot. Then a Fade. Fade can be used pretty well, especially good for information on a map like Corrode with a lot of corners. You kind of need that information. And then we have the Neon and the Vice. I am personally a Neon player. Neon is my most played agent. I have a lot of fun when I'm playing in Neon. You are either gonna have games where you can kill everyone or you get killed every time. So Neon is kind of a 50-50 pick. If you have a good setup with the Neon, you can play pretty well. You don't really need that on the Vice, so I'm gonna put the Vice above the Neon. And yeah, that would be my tier list on the new map for Corrode. I'm sorry for any Raina and Clove players. Your agents are just not that good on the new map. They can be used, but they're not anything special other than, like, for example, having the abilities used for themselves. Also, I'm sorry to the Sage players. Sage has a lot of cool walls, but Sage is just not that good of a pick anymore. Thank you everybody for watching, and see you guys tomorrow with another guide on a map. We have not yet decided which map and which agent we're gonna play, so leave your guesses or leave your ideas in the comments, and see you all tomorrow. Bye bye!